Hi guys, so we've just learned about the elements of design. And they are line, shape and form, space, value, color, and texture. Now it's important to know that these elements of design are seen in all artworks. You're not going to have an artwork that does not show an element of design. Now the thing about principles of design is the principle of design is what we do with the elements. How we apply the principles of design determines how successful the work of art is. The first principle of design that we're going to learn about is unity and harmony. Anytime an artist creates a principle of design, they have to arrange the elements in certain ways to show that specific principle. Harmony refers to a way of combining similar elements like line, shape, and color in an artwork to accent their similarities. Unity and harmony is achieved by repeating and/or gradually changing similar elements of a design. Pieces that are in harmony have an overall uniform appearance. So, for instance, here we have a painting that was done by Chuck Close. Chuck Close created this out of these organic looking shapes. We are seeing intense colors. We have the shape of a square that's being repeated throughout. So we have organic shapes, the shape of a square, and intense colors repeating throughout the entire composition. And because it's repeating throughout the entire composition, it is creating unity and harmony. Now, a fun fact about Chuck Close, not that fun in regards for him, but he experienced a spinal artery collapse when he was in his 50s that caused him to become a paraplegic. So this is actually the type of painting that he was creating prior to a spinal artery collapse. He created these hyper photorealistic paintings that were huge, and but ever since then he's had to adjust. He developed a paintbrush that is strapped onto his arm, and that's how he paints, and he creates these really interesting, really beautiful works that I find to be more interesting than the works he was doing in the beginning of his life. So what elements are being used in this artwork? Remember, the elements of design are arranged to create a principle of design. And we know unity and harmony is created by repeating similar elements. So here we have similar shapes being repeated, and it's all geometric shapes that are being repeated. We're seeing the same type of flat texture in the way the paint is applied. The color is similar because all of the colors have a high intensity. We're not seeing any dull colors. We could also say that the triangle shapes are making zigzag lines throughout the work. You could even stretch it to say that the side of the building has become a form that's being repeated because there's depth to the diamonds that are being pressed in. So because those elements are repeating throughout this mural, we're seeing the principle of design, unity, and harmony. In this one, what elements is the artist gradually repeating and changing to make this composition show unity and harmony? Same thing again. We have the same intense colors. We have vertical lines that are being repeated throughout. We have these organic type of shapes being repeated throughout. And we have the same flat application of paint showing a very smooth texture throughout the entire work, making this a unified design. What elements is the artist using in this work? Well, for this one, we are seeing a cool color scheme in her hair. We have curvilinear, organic looking lines and shapes that create her hair. We have white dots that are white shapes that are repeated throughout the entire composition. And because they're repeating all those things throughout, we're seeing the principle of design, unity, and harmony. The next one we're going to talk about is movement. I'm sorry, that picture is so pixelated. Movement is the principle of design that directs the viewer's eye throughout the work of art. To create movement in an artwork, you want to draw the elements of design on an angle. So here we have that bridge. The bridge itself is a form, but it's creating implied diagonal lines that are shooting your eye back to the people And then the pathway and the building on the left is shooting your eye back out forward again. Remember, a principle of design is created by how the elements are being arranged. And you have to arrange the elements on angles to show movement. The fish on the picture on the left, these koi fish, are forms. They're three-dimensional because there's a full range of value that we're seeing in them. The forms are placed on a diagonal line. The lines that are created for the watercolor, water, are also being placed on angled lines that help move your eye through the composition on a diagonal axis. We have a similar drawing in the eye in the middle. We have these koi fish again. Notice that the movement is going vertically up and down, but because the koi fish's bodies are angled as it moves down, your eye travels throughout the work. They're also utilizing the shape of the black splats, placing it in various areas to help jump your eye around as well. The drawing on the right, it always reminds me of like Crimea River. And here we have curvilinear line that is being placed on an angle throughout the entire work, and it's implying the direction that it wants your eyes to follow. Notice how they're varying that line as well. They're changing the degree of curve. They're also changing the width of those lines. Some are a little bit thinner and some are thicker in other areas. So what elements are being repeated and gradually changing to create harmony in this one? Here you could say it's probably a little bit of a combination of geometric and organic shapes, and also intense colors. For this one, you could say that there are dull colors being repeated throughout, as well as a more soft texture in the way the paint is applied. Here in the Van Gogh's painting, we're seeing curvilinear lines throughout the entire work. We're also seeing the similar texture in how the paint was applied. Balance is another principle of design, and that is a way of combining elements to add a feeling of stability in the work. There are two types of balance that you can show in an artwork. The first type is symmetrical. Symmetrical balance is easy to see. It is when two halves of a work are identical or very similar. Asymmetrical balance is when two sides of an artwork are not identical, but they differ from one another. So let's look at some examples. We know, like I said, that symmetrical balance is the same or almost the same on both sides. As we look at this illustration or drawing of these fish and birds, if we would draw a line down the center, it would not exactly line up because the fins are on one side and the heads of the fish are on the other. However, it's very similar. So what elements of design are being placed here to make it symmetrical? First, we have horizontal line surrounding the border. We have the same value on either side. We have a really dark value and a really light value. We have the same shape and form of the animals. Notice in that middle horizontal line, they're shapes, but as they reach the top point of the diamond and the bottom point of the diamond, we're seeing a full range of value. So then we're seeing forms. Here in this portrait, if you would draw a line straight through the center, it would be the same on both sides. The color is the same on both sides. The texture is the same on both sides. The form of the person is the same on both sides. Asymmetrical balance shows more elements on one side of the composition than the other, or you're just going to have an uneven placement of elements. In both of these images, we're seeing a large form on one side of the composition and really no form of anything on the other half, so that would make it asymmetrical. So let's review which one is symmetrical and which is symmetrical or asymmetrical. Obviously, this one would be symmetrical. Notice that you have a couple of those horizontal lines on the right-hand side. However, this is pretty identical, so it would still be considered symmetrical. This one, I would also say that it would be symmetrical. Even though that dot is slightly off to the left, they're balancing it out by putting two bright red dots on that horizontal line. This would be considered asymmetrical. We're seeing wider and more shapes on the right, like more of those long rectangular lines, and we're seeing more choppy, smaller shapes on the left. The next principle of design is emphasis or focal point. They're the same thing, but artists tend to use one phrase or the other. Emphasis and focal point is used to direct and focus the viewer's attention to the most important part or center of interest of a design. The center of interest of a design is the area of a piece where the artist wants you to focus attention. It catches your interest. So, how do they do this? Focal point and emphasis is most often created by contrasting the elements of design. So once again, the elements of design create the principle of design. Here we have a person sitting on a swing. Our eyes automatically drawn to the person. So what elements are being contrasted? First, you could say value. The person is really dark, the background is really light. You could also say color. There's this yellowish, grayish color in the background, and the person is void of color. You could also say value. Did I say value? I did say value. Let's talk about texture. There's a rough texture in the way the paint was applied, but then there's no texture on the person. So we're contrasting those elements together to have our eye be focused on that one particular person. This artwork on the right was done by street artist Banksy. The focal point in this work is the mountain. The mountain is a form, it's three-dimensional. The chairs and the table and the curtains are shapes, they're two-dimensional. The mountain scene has color, the chairs and table have no color. The mountain scene shows texture, no texture in the chairs. We see a full range of values in the window scene, and we only see two values in the chairs. So he's almost utilizing every single element of design to get you to look at that window. So what is the focal point in this work? Obvious one is that colored little funky person character drawing that we're seeing. You might see something different than I do. So what elements are being contrasted to make it the focal point? There's color. The color is lighter in value than the background, so our eye draws there. The focal point in this one is the gentleman's eyes. What elements are being contrasted to make it a focal point? You could say value. The whites of the eyes are really light, and that contrasts nicely with the darker values that we see in the rest of the painting. Repetition is the last element or principle of design that artists utilize in their work, and repetition refers to elements being repeated. So the Marilyn Monroe painting that we see on the left was done by Andy Warhol. We are seeing that square shape repeated throughout. We're seeing the same portrait. It could be a form. There is some three-dimensionality there, so the same form of her face is being repeated. We're seeing similar intense colors being repeated as well as vertical and horizontal lines that separate the squares from one another. The sculpture on the right, we're seeing a three-dimensional rectangular form being repeated as well as the same blue color. I hope you have enjoyed watching this and that you learned a little bit more about how you can utilize the elements of design to create a principle and have a really nicely composed artwork.